Hey everybody, it's James. Was sneezing a little bit earlier, so I had to stop the roll and get going again. But we're doing the first discussion post here, and it's about it's 2 minutes shy of 3 a.m. So definitely want to get this bed so I can get some shut eye. Actually, I want to get this done so I can get to bed and get some shut eye. So I really like this book. Unwrapping the Standards is it's a fast-paced textbook, if that makes any sense. I like the way the author really does a great job of presenting the concepts quickly in simple terms, and I think that's great. The first part I wanted to talk about that I thought was really good idea-wise was the way he talks about standards and indicators and separates them out. I also like the way that he talks about prepping um, the lesson uh, by breaking the standards down into nouns and verbs, like what you got to do and the actions that you got to do. And that goes into the standards and indicators, right? And then he also presents several different ways to break them down using graphical analysis, which we've used before, um, and organizing the skills in either using like you said, like the graphic organizer that he talks about in this book, which I'm not sure. I like. I tend to do it in the spreadsheet form. I don't know. I mean, taking the notes and having the stuff all over in the bubbles, just that doesn't really do it for me. But being able to break down, like I said, the actions, the nouns, and the actions that you got to do, and the status indicators, I think is a really great way to figure out what you've got to be able to teach in the lesson. And then understanding the difference between the standard and the indicator, I think, is a really important part of this. And I love the example that he uses for the grade two mathematics sample, and how the standard, it lists it out. And in the CTE section of the on the ODA website, or ODE website rather, um, is where I found the business stuff. And CTE is what I'm focused in. Also visual arts, because I was a photojournalist for so long. So looking at those standards and actually being able to break those into something that makes sense, it can be kind of tough because some of the criteria are very subjective. So I really like this because it gives me a way to uh, break the plan down into simple terms that can be understood by both the students and anyone who's helping with the evaluation or the evaluation itself, right? It's almost like you're writing the tests, or and then you don't just need to use tests, right? Especially with the visual arts portion, a lot of that is project based. So anyway, I'm gonna pause this right here, and then I'm gonna go to the next section that I highlighted here. So we're continuing on, and then uh, so this next section that obviously was about big ideas, and that was chapter two. What is a big idea, and how do the students relate to it, especially younger students, right? Um, so first we cover what a big idea is, right? It's the large concept, kind of the what did you learn? What was the purpose of the lesson, right? So if I was talking in camera terms, you know, a big idea would be frame rate. Another big idea would be, where did photography come from? You know, and another big idea would be how did film and emulsion photography evolve into digital photography? What are the differences between the two, and why is it important to understand some of techniques and things about film photography and how they're emulated in digital photography, right? Those are big concept ideas that help the student grab on to a topic. I also think that the big ideas are really important because they provide the context for the lesson. And it's something I've always not understood about some of the classes that I've had. Um, some of the classes that you get are very specific and dig into specific things. I remember there was a physics class in particular that I took, and it was so disjointed. Right, we'd move from okay, calculating parabolic motion to you know here's parabolic motion, here's a bunch of math problems related to parabolic motion, and then next week we're going to do electricity and how voltage pressure works between the positive and negative sides of a circuit. And it was just information, 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 information. And I realized that we had some of the bigger concepts maybe and some of the context and even some of the early thinking of how some of this stuff how those concepts got figured out, I probably would have been a lot more successful in that physics class, and I probably would have enjoyed it a little more. And I realized that, my style of learning, and then from all the students I've had over the years, I've always gone from kind of that big concept, that big idea, right? Of why are we here? Why are we learning this, right? I mentioned Stoicism in one of my posts in one of the other classes. I am a bit of a Stoic, and when it comes to that, and so, kind of grounding the information that we're getting in a contextual sense is really important. And I really, really like how he talks about the big ideas. Right here, the highlighted note that I had, the quote that I used. Instead of an educator trying to tell students why literary devices are important, wouldn't it be marvelous if students, upon completion of a novel that was rich in literary devices, could announce to the teacher, "Now I understand why you made us learn metaphors, allusion, satire, and irony. The novel we read was just so much more interesting because you taught us those literary devices. Then asked us to identify them in the novel and tell them why they were important to the story. They really got me into the imaginary world of the author. Now I understand why this is a great book," right? So ELA teachers, that's what they're doing. They're trying to share knowledge about storytelling and culture and our civilization, like what we do as we reflect on ourselves, right? Because that's what a lot of literature is. It's a reflection of our culture and our society, right? That's a big idea. And if all you're doing is reading Shakespeare and you don't have a context to put it in, it's pretty boring, especially if you don't understand it. And like I said, you have no context to put it in. So I think the big ideas are the most important part of the lesson to me, right? And I like the the air was it the Aristotle's method, I'm trying to remember, of kind of laying the breadcrumbs out and letting the students find the answers for themselves. I think that's really important because I think that in order to have mastery learning of something, you got to develop the wrinkles in your own brain. And that's why just watching television, you don't really get anything out of it. You really got to get down on your hands and knees and get in the dirt and play with the Legos, in some respect, in order to learn what it is that you need to learn. And just to circle back around to the big idea portion, I think that without the big idea, or the conceptualization of those ideas and a context to put the lesson in, the learning will be more beneficial. I also think the students will be more interested in the thing that they're doing. There was a study that I really love to do that I came up with when I was building escape rooms and making games. This idea of the story being super important and having a context being important to the enjoyment of the game is a really big deal. What I'd like to do is take, a sample, say 30 students, divide them into 3 groups by how important they think a story is to a game, right? So you give them a little survey about the games, and then based off the survey answers, you divide them into 3 groups of 10, just say if I could get 30. and then you would present them with a game. Now, a mix of people who thought the story was important, the story wasn't important, would be given the game with a story concept. So, say it's just a dice game, right? But there's a backstory to the dice game, and there's what we call fluff writing, about the dice game, and the dice game has a human component where maybe it's two people who are trying to get through a maze, and there's a story to it, and then kind of like the game of life, right, where there's a story as you're going around the track, right. Then another group of 10 people would play the same game, but there would be no backstory. It would simply be telling the score between the dice rolls, whatever the game was, right. And then you'd have a control group of 10 who wouldn't play the game, but would read about the game, right? Read the instructions of the game, just as and tell people what they thought about the game. And I guess you'd need another group of 10 that would read the instructions without any of the fluff or backstory, right? And from that data, my hypothesis is that having the context and having some sort of story that goes along with the game makes the game more enjoyable, and that people's overall rating of the game would be higher if there was a story that they relate to or characters that they were taking on the role of inside the game, versus just a game that was simply rolling for dice, or a score of some kind, right? I know that's a little bit of a segue into what we're talking about, but it goes back to what I'm talking about. You have to have, in my opinion, you have to have context for the lesson to be able to be mastered. And the big ideas that they're talking about in Unwrapping the Standards is give you that concept for those lessons. And then the students that really understand those concepts are going to be able to apply that thinking, just like they do in his example on page 43. Those students that understand that are going to be able to apply those larger concepts to wider areas of literature, right, or whatever they're studying. The other example he gives was ancient civilizations, right, and so students would be able to see problems in the Aztec or Mayan civilizations and how they parallel some of the problems we may be facing today. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Let's go on to the next part. All right, third question from the text. Writing the essential questions. Essential questions. Okay, kids ask themselves questions all the time. My kids, 6 to 13 now, soon to be 14, soon to be 7, they're all growing up. One of the things they always do is ask why. They ask a lot of why questions, right? They want to know why things happen. And that's kind of part of that childhood wonder. And so when we talk about context and we talk about the big ideas, eventually we want the kids to ask the why questions so they can start to understand and apply the information in new and different ways to the world than what they had before, right? And I think that's truly what mastery learning is. That we want them to exceed the teacher, right? We want their knowledge to go beyond ours. That's what we hope for the next generation, that they can take what we did and make it work better, right? So we talked about buy-in with the lesson in some of the other classes. We talked about scaffolding lessons. I remember one example of kids playing and being in a store, right? They're acting out when they're younger what it's like to buy and sell things. And I watched my kids do that. My middle daughter would set up her little store. My older daughter, she liked to play school, so she would set up a school and she would pretend to be the teacher and she would give lessons to the two younger ones. The middle daughter liked to play store, so she would have things that she would set up on shelves and she would buy and sell them. Did she understand any business concepts other than I'm going to give you this in return for something else. It was very basic, right? But they were exhibiting some very complicated behaviors, and getting to some fundamental business concepts, just by playing, right? And that's what playing is. We're doing that thing where we're letting them play and get the whole big idea, right? Just like you was talking about earlier. Um, and then when they're negotiating play with each other, it's really fun because that's when they start asking why. Why are we doing these things, right? And then when they start discovering those questions, they realize that they need information. And that's when they come and ask me for information, right? And I think that's the best place to be as a teacher. As I was reading through here, it really gets into the idea that the students, in standards-based learning, eventually they're going to want to get the information from you because they need it to further their own projects or their own understanding of the subject. And I think if you can present the answers to those questions, or even better, have them answer those questions themselves, and then they eventually find more questions. It really kind of mimics the scientific method in that regard, which I think is really cool. The section here that I really liked was on page 45. It says big ideas, the answers to the essential questions. It says when educators pose essential questions to the students at the inception of an instructional unit, they advertising upfront the learning goals they expect students to meet. They then use the essential questions and unwrapped concepts and skills as instructional filters for selecting lessons and activities that will advance student understanding towards those learning goals. Okay, that is exactly right. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about context, right? And it's storytelling even. What do? We have a beginning, and middle, and end. It was like that. I was talking about that in the other class, how lessons need a beginning, middle, and end. And if they're told in an interesting way, and you use that kind of three-part story structure when you're building your lesson, your lesson's going to be more entertaining. It's going to be easier to teach, and I think it'll be easier, at least for me, to keep track of where I'm at in the lesson and help the students gauge where they're at in the lesson. Because we'll know the ones who are rushing to the end and who get the concepts and are ready to move on. We'll know the ones who are struggling in the middle, and we'll know the ones that we have to help get started. The students will make themselves known in that process, right? And if you think about it in that way, the beginning, and middle, and end, then this section right here called, about foreshadowing the essential questions, basically putting the lesson into context and saying, hey, here's what we're going to learn, and here's some of the things I want you guys to think about while we're going through the lesson. And if things are really going well in the classroom, that hopefully will lead to the students asking more questions, and then we have to find out more. We as a group can follow those interesting questions to their conclusions, right? Or to more interesting questions. So I think teaching this way early on leads to students who are more interested in kind of the long-term goals around education. So that's what I have to say about that piece. So I'm going to go on. I'm going to talk about the videos a little bit, and then we will wrap up. Okay, let's talk about the videos, the PowerPoint presentation, and the explanations through the video. Great class, by the way. It really is helping to be able to go through the PowerPoint presentation and have it explained on the video. That's a big help to me. I was able to stop it, rewind it, watch it, multiple times, and there were sections that I needed just to see again. And it was really helpful watching, basically going through the entire lesson plan rubric and the lesson plan format itself, and what's expected to be in there. the two slides I like the best were the non-essential questions and the essential questions slide. Um, those two slides, kind of breaking it down, what's an essential question? And I know in my previous statements, in the reading, Dr. Hayes Melanie, she asks us, why are we basing our units on essential questions, and why do we consider these in our teaching? Once again, I think it's because it grounds the lesson and gives it context, so it's easier to understand because it's there's things that relate to it. And then I think that's important to use in the teaching because once again it brings us to the storytelling kind of idea where we're doing things in threes and we're giving a lesson with a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? We've got a conclusion. And then we've got some other things in there, the feedback loop for the kids and all that other stuff. But what we're really going after is, why do we care what the essential questions are, right? Well, if we're doing our breakdown of the curriculum, the standards, then we know what they have to do in standards-based learning, right? We know from the matrices that we get from the Oregon Department of Education, what's expected of those students in the different categories. Students who are excelling, students who are just getting it, and then students that need more help, right? And then that lets us help the kids that need more help, accelerate the kids that are ready to be accelerated, and make sure the kids that are, meeting the standards are ready to move on to the next steps, next levels, right? And that's what's important is being able to move on to the next list. So why do we consider these in this teaching? The question that's asked is, well, we need to prepare the students to move on to the next big thing, and hopefully, reinforcing those mastery learning goals so they continue to ask these questions and come up with solutions, in their own way, the problems that we're facing today, right? We're really hoping to further our civilization and our culture through our teaching. So those are the big picture why questions there. And I think it's really funny when we talk about when she goes from essential questions are causing genuine and relevant inquiry into the big ideas of a discipline. That hits the nail on the head, right? And then the non-essential questions, what is a linear equation? Now, just because it's not an essential question doesn't mean it's an important question, right? It might be a question that we answer in the lesson, but why she's asking, why are these non-essential questions? Well, they don't relate back to the big idea or the big concept that the lesson might be about, right? So I think that's really good. And then I think being able to identify the difference between the two will really help in the lesson planning and figuring out what exactly needs to be taught and evaluated to make sure that the kids are ready to move to the next level with the standards that we're teaching them. So really good, really good there. I'm going to pause it here and then I'll do the final piece. So there were two things from all of the stuff that we learned that I really are new to me, right? It's because I'm not a teacher, but the idea of this idea is that standards and learning targets are different, right? And the whole idea of academic language, and what was that other, cognitive demand. So I am still foggy, I'll be honest, on the standards versus learning targets piece, right? I've listened to that a few times. I have trouble. I think I would have trouble identifying them if I was given hey, is this a learning target or is this a standard, right? But I will say that it seems to me that the standards that are as they're written in the matrices that we get from the Oregon Department of Education that's pretty clear, and then the learning targets themselves seem to be, um, at least to me, the parts of the questions that, like the test, right? So the learning standard is, here's what we here's what we want them to know. Here's the standard that they have to meet to move forward, right? And then the target themselves is actually the evaluation, and that's kind of like how I've been thinking of it, right? Um, I'm clicking through here, kind of, on the matrix. So right here, the standard is the student knows that energy flows through an ecosystem. Um, this was slide 23 in the PowerPoint. It says students know that energy flows through an ecosystem from producers to consumers. These relationships can be shown for specific populations of food labs. And then the learning targets say, I can identify a producer, I can identify a consumer, I can identify a decomposer, etc. Right? So to me, the standard is kind of like the big question or the essential question, and then the targets are the things that you would test to make sure that uh, the student knows the language, the vocabulary, the academic language that is associated with the topic, right? And then the second part of that, getting towards the actually meeting the standard is, being able to answer those questions, kind of like in the test. That's kind of what I was saying earlier. So I'd really never heard, them, the idea of learning targets and standards being broken down that way. So that was new to me. Anyway, I hope this video finds everyone who watches it well. I feel like it's kind of like a podcast, and I will kick off here, but thank you for this opportunity, and I am going to